Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome back to another Sims 4 speedrunning video, or welcome to the channel if you are new here. So in today's video, I'm going to be building in the world of Windenburg, which is the world that we got from the expansion pack of Sims 4 Get Together, and I'm going to be building a small Tudor-ish, Tudor-inspired family home. So first things first, Happy New Year. This is officially my first upload of 2023, and so technically, this is the first time I've spoken to you this year, even though I uploaded last week. But you know, it's a new year, so anyway, Happy New Year. I hope everyone enjoyed their New Year's Eve, regardless of what you were doing. But this week, I thought I would kind of kickstart off this brand new year by building something kind of on the smaller side of things, because I came to the realisation fairly recently that I tend to build a lot of big things. And don't get me wrong, I love building a big house, but every so often it's just nice to sit down and build kind of like a cozy, comfy cottage, or like a smaller family home, something that's maybe a little bit more easy to manage. Even though saying that, I always like to try and make all of my houses or everything that I build easy for gameplay, so like the floor plan, the layout and everything. But I know that a lot of people, and I also appreciate that a lot of people like to play in smaller houses as well, and so I just fancy building something small, cozy and just really comfortable and cute this week. And so yeah, that is pretty much what I did, so I hope you like it. But getting on and actually talking a little bit more about the build itself. So this house has 2 bedrooms and 1.5 bathrooms. I'm saying 1.5 because on the downstairs portion, you go in, there's actually 2 front doors technically in this house. I don't know if you noticed, but at the front there ends up being 2 front doors, but the one that's on the right hand side, the kind of like the single door, if you want to put it that way, it kind of goes into a bit of a mud room space. So in there it's kind of a bit of a hallway, and then there's a door and it goes into one of the bathrooms. There is a washing machine, a tumble dryer, and then a toilet and a sink. And then on the upstairs level there is a fully fleshed out bathroom, you know, bathtub, shower, sink, like all the bits and bobs that basically go into a bathroom are on the upstairs level. But then I decorated the bedrooms to be one for a set of parents, or like a single parent. I'm more so thinking single parent, but this is just purely for the fact of when I was building this, I did kind of have an idea and kind of like a storyline, a family idea that I was running off as I was building this house and as I was going around decorating it. Because oftentimes whenever I build, I just like to have a little bit of a brief to go off, if you get what I mean. Sometimes I find it's a little bit easier if you can picture certain Sims with certain careers, with certain hobbies, living in their house, and then when it comes around to decorating it, it can just make it a little bit easier, I find anyway. But I was personally imagining maybe like a single parent, but it is a double bed, so you could have 2 if you want to. And there is also a room for a kid. I was personally thinking a little girl. But as well as that, there also ends up being a little bit of a, I was about to say greenhouse, but it's not a greenhouse, a conservatory. You know when people have like extensions in the back of their house and they oftentimes have like a glass roof and then windows all the way like wrapping around it? It's not so much a conservatory because there isn't a glass roof, but you see over here what I'm doing right now, where I've got all these windows kind of like wrapping around one wall, and then we've also got the double doors. In there it ends up being kind of a mini like greenhouse, so it's filled with so many different plants. I use so many different plants in that room, some that I use all the time and some that I've never used before. I also use some planters in that room, but then it also kind of doubled up to be a bit of a dining room space. It kind of goes hand in hand with the sim that I was picturing could potentially live in this house. But then as well as that, there also ends up being kind of like a little desk area, study nook. You know over here where I'm talking about with the 2 doors, I realised that I said to you, you know where I've got the 2 front doors and the doors weren't even placed onto the build yet, but you might have seen it from the thumbnail. Either way, you see over here we've got one door on the right hand side. In there, that's where that little mud room is that I was talking about, but also just off the mud room it's kind of like a little, I don't want to say like study because it's not technically a room, but it's kind of like a hallway study. There is a computer desk, there is also a bookcase in there, and then in terms of the rest of the house, it's just your everyday, you know, kitchen, lounge, just every other like bits and bobs within this house. But yeah, I had a lot of fun decorating this. It was very comfortable and very cozy to decorate, and I also did it in a style interior wise I don't feel like I lean towards that often, so yeah, it was quite fun to decorate. But anyway, moving on from that and actually getting on and talking a little bit more about what I'm doing right now. So you can see that I've pretty much built the whole structure of the house, if you want to put it that way. It was quite quick and easy to build because I'm only building on I think it's a 20 by 20 lot off memory. I can't, if that's wrong, it will be in the build description, in the build details in the description box down below. Like always, I always put down like the build details, how much it costs, where it's located, and also all the different packs that I use in the build. But yeah, it's built on a fairly small lot, and so in terms of building the main structure of the house, it came together fairly easily. And I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, one thing that did dramatically help the building process is I was looking at a picture when I was building this. I'll find the picture and I'll pop it up on the screen now so you can have a little look. Like always, whenever I look at a picture, whether I'm just trying to get some bits and pieces from it and try and get inspired by the build, or if ever I'm trying to recreate it into the game, I always like to try and mention it just so you're aware. But yeah, I found this picture on Pinterest and it's kind of like a little model of a Tudor house, and it's so sweet. But the thing is, I'm actually now looking at it because I've got the picture up on my screen so I can look at the build and then also look at, you know, my editing software. But as I'm looking at it, if I was to probably try and build this and I was trying to make it true to scale to what I can imagine it to be in the picture, it could have probably ended up being built on like a 30 by 40 lot or something, because if you was to really look at the picture, you might be able to, I'll try and zoom in, but there is kind of like a little character standing by one of the front doors, and the character looks really small in comparison to the house. And so I tried to basically build that but make it a little bit more squished, make it a little bit more of a cottagey kind of style, because like I said, I just fancy building something small this week. And so I basically took that picture and tried to squish it in, and this is basically what it ended up turning out to be. But getting back to it, you can see that I've already done all the different wallpapering, placed down all the different windows and, you know, multiple front doors, because like I said, there is two. Don't worry, I did set it. So you see the one that's got the little, I'm not even sure what it's called, wreath, is that how you say it? That the one that's meant to be the front door, I did set it in the game to be manually the front door, so your Sims won't go to the other one, they'll go to that front door. And I've playtested this build and Sims will go to the main front door, if you want to put it that way. But I'm just finishing up basically like the front street view of the build. So I've already done all the landscaping. One thing that I really like doing with landscaping, and I've done it so many different times, is I like to try and lock in the flower beds by using multiple different live edit fences, because although we've got some really nice fences in the game itself, the live edit ones are just so much nicer, I think anyway. And the thing is as well, you can really get them to be exactly where you want them to be, because the way that Sims 4 works and the way that fences in the game work, you know, when you try and draw a wall and you're kind of like restricted to the grid system, it's kind of like the same thing with the fences. And so sometimes if you want to have a bit of a curved area, it can be really fiddly and just really tricky, and you can do it, but it does take a lot of hard work. Live edit fences, you can plop it down and you're good. And so I use a live edit fence, which I believe is from the Cottage Living expansion pack. Like I said, I've done this method a few different times, and I more so always tend to go towards this particular fence. But basically, when you normally pull it out of the live edit menu, it's huge, like it's absolutely massive. I'm pretty sure it took up all the space in the lot. I used a tool mod and I shrunk it down to, I believe, it could have been like 0.10 or 0.15. Basically, I shrink it down to a really small percentage of the original size, and then I basically rotate it, elevate it into the floor a little bit so it looks like it's actually coming out of the ground. And then I found these matching poles, or like matching posts, not poles, you know what I mean, but I found these matching posts, and then I basically put them into the fence itself, but I put them in at different like areas of the fence, and I tried to elevate them down to be so it kind of would be the same elevation as what the fence would be going into the floor, because the fence itself, the live edit fence, is different heights. So the start of the fence and then the end of the fence, it basically goes down on a very slight slope. But then when I elevate it into the floor, as you go more towards the build, the wall kind of gets a little bit higher. But then when I put these posts into the fence itself, I try to elevate it so then it kind of matched that. Hopefully that makes sense. But basically, I just plopped them in, and then it just makes kind of like a nice little sectioned off flower bed. I love doing it because it makes it feel a little bit more customizable, and especially when you're building in this particular area of Windenburg like I am, which, if you're curious, I believe is meant to be like the old town area of the world, but it's meant to be a little bit of a built up area, or basically just not the countryside. When you're trying to landscape in these kind of areas, I personally find it a little bit hard to have quite overgrown flower beds, and so using the fences kind of help disguise it in some kind of way. But as well as that, as you might have seen on the front portion, I also placed down a few different like street signs, a few different like drains into the floor. I also placed down like a really rusty bike at the front, because I was picturing that maybe it's one of them bikes that has probably been locked up by its owner probably about 20 years ago and they never came back for it, and so maybe the Sims that moved into this house just liked the characteristics of it, and so they decided to keep it in their front garden or something. But now, as you can see, I've just moved over into the back garden. Now, for the size of the lot that it is, which again I don't know right now, but I would have it written down in the description box down below, but for the size of the lot that it is, I feel like I managed to fit quite a a good handful amount of activities in this back garden. There ends up being 2 big planters, a bird feeder, then there's also the bird trunk, which the bird feeder you can like feed birds in, and then the bird trunk is it's basically like this gameplay object that we got from the Cottage Living expansion pack, and you place it down and it just looks like an old tree trunk that's kind of like been cut down and it's been left. But your Sims can interact with it and they can like sing to the birds, they can give presents to the birds, and eventually if you do it so many different times you can kind of like bond with the birds, if that makes any sense. No, with Seasons, the expansion pack, we got the beekeeping hut and you can bond with the bees. Eventually you can pretty much just bond with the birds, but there ends up being quite a good handful amount of things that your Sim can do in the back garden. There's also the little washing line, there's a flower arranging table, there's also a few different like singular planters. For the size of the garden that it is, I feel like it's got a good handful amount of different gameplay activities in there. But now, as you can see, I've now moved on into the inside of the house, and I started off by doing it kind of like the little entrance hallway. Now, like I said, when I was building and decorating this house, I was kind of going off a little bit of a brief that I gave myself. It was more so kind of like an idea that I had for a storyline, and then I wanted to build something small anyway, and so it kind of just it merged in nicely together. But basically I wanted to build something that I was picturing a single Sim lived in for many years by themselves, and they eventually was able to adopt a child. It's kind of like where the child's bedroom comes in, you know, like the child's area of the house. But basically when I was building it, I wanted it to feel like a single Sim had probably lived here for a good duration of their lives. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen the film Matilda. I feel like most people have. It's very popular, and I'm pretty sure they've either just done a new version of the Matilda, or they've brought out like Matilda the musical. I keep on seeing so much about it on TikTok, but either way, you know the film Matilda? Well, you know the character, Miss Honey, who is like this really sweet teacher that works in the school? I was basically picturing a storyline for a Sim that I was basing off the character of Miss Honey from the film Matilda. I haven't seen the film in a while. I probably should rewatch it. Now they're probably going to be doing like reruns of the original Matilda, but I was basically picturing a Sim with the same kind of character as Miss Honey from the film Matilda to live in this house. Now, I didn't want to exactly copy the personality of Miss Honey and basically do like a copy paste scenario in the Sims. I didn't want to basically just make the Sims version of her. It was more so a bit of a, like I said, a bit of a brief, a little bit of a starting point. I always like to have them whenever I do my builds, but I was more so going off of different skills and hobbies and also like characteristics I imagine the Sim version of her might potentially have, and then kind of put it into this Sim storyline. And so I kind of started off with the idea of, okay, well, what about if the Sim version of her is potentially a primary school teacher? Like I said, I didn't want to completely copy the whole entire idea of Miss Honey, but I wanted to take elements from the personality and put it in. And one of the main things that we know Miss Honey is a primary school teacher. She teaches school, you know, she helps educate children. And so I thought, okay, well, I like that kind of idea for this potential Sim. And so I was thinking that the Sim that lives in this house is a primary school teacher, probably has spent many years teaching in the same like little like village primary school somewhere. Maybe they work in like Henfield or Bagley, and they work in like an old school, probably only got like 1 or 2 classrooms or something, just so very, very quaint, just very small and very sweet. But I also imagine that this Sim really liked gardening, and so that is why there is so many different planters both in the garden in this house, and then also kind of like that little greenhouse conservatory room that kind of like backs onto the back garden. It's got like the dining room table in there. That is why there are so many different plants in that room, is because this Sim really likes gardening. I also imagine them to be someone that's really into like baking and, you know, maybe a little bit of crochet here and there, a bit of like arts and crafts. You know, you probably get the kind of idea that I'm trying to relate to you. But I was thinking about this scenario of this Sim that's probably lived in this house their whole entire life. I was thinking that this is probably like their parents' house or something, and it had been handed down through maybe like the family's will, and they've always wanted to settle down and have a family of their own. But I was picturing that this little old Sim, bless him, has had a really bad love life. Like, they just keep on failing in so many different relationships. I feel like it's not them, it's more so the other end of the relationship, but they keep on finding these partners, and then somewhere down the line the relationship fails, and so they're kind of like back to square one. But their one biggest thing is they've always wanted to have a child. Now, maybe this is the reason why their previous relationships have always like just gone downhill, because maybe they've always been with partners and they've loved their partners, but then maybe the person that they're with, or the Sim that they're with, hasn't wanted to have a family, or maybe start a family as much as what the Sim wanted to. So maybe that's why their relationships or their previous relationships went downhill. But I was thinking that this Sim has just desperately wanted to start this family for such a long time, and eventually they just thought, you know what, I'm just going to do it by myself. I don't need anyone else. And so they decided to adopt a child, and that's kind of like where the kids portion of the house come in. But I imagine that they're probably still a little primary school teacher, probably in like the village of, what's it called, Finchwick village, which is one of the different neighbourhoods that we've got in the area of Henford and Bagley. They probably still teach there. I imagine that they could potentially be their kids' teacher, potentially. I kind of like the idea, and going back to like the Miss Honey kind of like idea that kind of happens towards the end of the film anyway. But yeah, that was kind of like the idea that I had for a sim that could live in this house. You don't have to stick to it, by the way. This was just kind of like the thing that I had in my head, but as I was building. So as we go around the build, you might be able to notice like little bits and pieces here and there. So you can see that I just finished up the lounge room, and in the lounge room I wanted it to feel like this sim has really tried to make parenting as fun as what they could possible, and try and make all the different areas of the house as fun for the kid. And so in like the lounge room, we've got like this toy box behind the sofa with all these different like toys spilling out of it. We've also got some like toys on the floor. I merged in a teddy bear into one of the sofas as well to make it look like maybe that's the kid's teddy, and they've just left it downstairs where maybe they're just having dinner, or maybe they're having tea or something in the little like greenhouse conservatory room, and they just plopped their teddy onto the little sofa as well. But yeah, that was just kind of like the idea that I had, and I just really like it. I feel like it's so sweet and wholesome, and I feel like for gameplay it could be quite an interesting storyline to just play throughout. Also, I do imagine that this sim had a cat before the kid came along. Before the kid was adopted, I imagine that they had this cat, bit of a cat lady for a little while, not like an extreme cat lady, like they didn't have like 15 cats, but they had this one quite old fluffy cat, and I imagine that they still live in this house. And so you might also notice throughout the house there's like kind of like references towards having a cat. So in the kitchen I'm going to add like a food bowl, but by like the little mudroom area I placed down a litter box with like some muddy paw prints. There's also like scratching posts in the house, different like balls of yarn that I imagine that the cat plays with sometimes, just little pieces here and there like that. But anyway, moving on from that, and actually getting back to talking about what I'm doing right now. So you probably noticed that I did kind of speak over some of the downstairs area of this house, but I basically did the little entrance hallway, did that little kind of like study hallway area that I was talking about at the start of the build. It's got like a computer and a little tiny bookcase, and then we've also kind of got like the mudroom area, which had basically like this towel unit, which is from Eco Lifestyle, and I sized it up to be the exact size of the wall, and I tried to merge it in to make it look like a bit of a built-in unit for your Sims to keep all their different like pillowcases, extra blankets, and you know, like extra bits and bobs like that. I also did the little like laundry room, utility room space. I never know what to term it as, because I feel like depending on where you live in the world, you call it different things. And so just for like clarity, I always tend to call it both whenever I do my voiceovers. But you know, when you keep your washing machine and tumble dryer, the half bath in this house, you would have quickly just seen me do that, and then also the kitchen. But now, as you can see, I've now moved on into this kind of like little conservatory space, basically like a little room filled with plants. This room was so much fun to decorate because I got to use all these different plants, more so the ones that we got from the Werewolf game pack. Rarely ever use them. I don't think I've ever used them in a build before, but they just fitted in perfectly into this room. The ones that I'm talking about, you see it on the left hand side of the screen, where you've got them different like cluster of, I think it's 4 or possibly 5 different plants. They look like they're in tin cans. They're from the Werewolves game pack. I always see these in the build and buy catalogue, and I always want to use them, but the thing is, for the type of plant that it is, which is not just like a singular plant that you can pop into a corner and kind of like call it a day, it's more so like a collection of plants that look like they've been struggling for a few years. And the only reason why I'm saying that is because if you actually look at the plants, it looks like they've got all these different like poles and different support beams to try and help the plant grow. If that's the right terminology, I don't know. I'm not a gardener. I'm just going off what I've seen before. But it looks like these plants are a little bit, they've had a hard time, and so they're a bit struggling on that kind of side. And so normally when I'm trying to put a plant down into a house, whether it be like a bedroom or in like a living room or somewhere, I never tend to go towards them, because why, you just want like a fully fleshed out fern, I would anyway, and so I never get to use them. But for this build, it was perfect to fit into kind of like a little bit of a green room conservatory, also a bit of a dining room space. It was like the perfect plant to put into that room, and so I put it into a corner. Next to that, I placed down this little like debug wooden crafted chair, which, if you're not aware and you've never seen that object before, it's a base game item. It's not CC or anything, but it's basically a chair that your Sims would make at the woodworking table. So I placed that down into there, and I basically used the red shelf to get all these different plants and all these different like other ferns and little like these different planters and basically move objects them onto the chair, and then also place down like some of them underneath it to make it look like this sim has got so many different plants. I don't know what to do with it. So they've got plants now sitting on dining room chairs. They've also got plants underneath the dining room chairs, and there is also some planters in the corner. There's also loads of different hanging plants as well. I think I use a collection of 3. So one of them is the Blooming Rooms one, which I also ended up using in this bathroom. You can see that I've now moved on to the upstairs portion, but I use this same fern in the bathroom, also in that downstairs room. But then I also use a hanging like ceiling plant, which is from, I believe, the Paranormal Stuff pack, and it's the one that's kind of got like the golden metal, what's it called, like plant pot or like tin that the plant sits in. And there is also another one which I use, which is from the Nifty Knitting debug menu, if you are curious, because I often get questions whenever I use them where they're from. The one that is from the Nifty Knitting debug menu, you have to get your sim to like actively craft, and so if you're not familiar with that one, if you've never seen that one before, that is the reason why. But also in that room I just put like a little china cabinet, if you want to call it that. But now, as you can see, and now like I just mentioned, I have now moved on to the upstairs portion. Quickly just did the little hallway area, quickly did the bathroom, which the bathroom, to be honest, ended up being quite a decent size. I mean, I managed to be able to fit a separate bathtub and shower, as well as a toilet, a sink, and then also the laundry basket, and also the little, I don't even know what it's called, like a little storage unit where your sims will keep like their spare toilet paper, all their like cleaning supplies and stuff. But now, as you can see, I've moved over into the first bedroom, which is the child's room. So in here I wanted it to feel as cutesy as I could possible. So my absolute go-to and like my non-negotiable thing that I wanted to do for this room is I wanted to use this wallpaper, which is from the Cottage Living expansion pack, and I basically tried to decorate the rest of the room to be very cutesy, very just sweet. So I used the Seasons bed, which is the one that's got the red curtains on it. I also placed down the chest of drawers, which is again from the Cottage Living expansion pack. In that room themselves, in terms of like children activities, I ended up placing down the doll's house, and then also the Bigfoot like teddy bear thing that your sims can like hug, or they can like yell at, or if they're feeling a little bit like feisty, kids can hit it. But now, as you can see, I've now moved over the last room in this house, which is kind of like the single parents room. So in here I use this base game bed. I can literally count on one hand, I think, the amount of times I've used this bed before in the past. Doesn't get much use in my game, but I thought it was kind of like a perfect fit for that bedroom in this house. But now, as you can see, I'm just going to go around the outside of the house, finish it off by adding some wisteria and like separate ivy pieces, and that is basically it. So anyway guys, I'm going to end this voiceover right here. As always, you can download this build via the gallery. My gallery ID is JessicapieYT, or you can just search for the hashtag JessicapieYT or just the hashtag Jessicapie. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and as always, if you do like my content, then please do subscribe, and hopefully I will see you in my next Sims 4 speedbuilding video. Bye guys!